Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's poppin', Fantasy Champs? Final show of the week for Week 9. From here on out, all of the weeks for the NFL are double digit.
Oh my gosh, dude. This wow.
8 weeks to go in the NFL season.
We're over halfway.
I can't. I mean, I do know
it really
football,
does fly,
there's
doesn't
football
it?
on until February. But
yeah, but I don't know.
fantasy football flies.
Even February is like
there
it's
is
one
6
game.
weeks left in the fantasy football season, in the regular season.
Yikes, dude.
This is where our viewer totals start to plummet.
Yeah. And the season is over.
Because people typically check out after their fantasy teams are over. So those 0-6 teams are just bouncing.
Yeah.
You're
You're not listening to any more fantasy podcasts.
You might be able to go 7-1 to end the season.
Yeah.
Make it 7-7. But today we're getting closer to your trade deadline. So I think normal trade deadlines are week 10 or 11.
I think so.
We're going to take you all the way up to the start of the fantasy playoffs in most leagues, because I feel like a lot of leagues don't have normal trade deadlines. I don't know why.
Yeah. Depends.
So we'll keep doing buys and sells. But this is week 9, buy and sell. Maybe we'll transition for the buys and sells show once the trade deadlines are over to dynasty buys and sells.
Oh.
Some leagues don't turn off trades. Don't turn off trades for their dynasty leagues.
The problem is dynasty buy and sells don't really change much week to week.
That's true. That is very true.
Maybe an episode, though.
Yeah. Hey. But either way, we got buys and sells, trade targets. We're going to tell you some guys to go grab to fix your team. Rick made a massive trade this past week.
I did. Yeah, and I hated every second of it.
Traded a lot of players for a lot of players. So I'll let him tell you in a second. I'll do the intro first. Before we do, check out our website, fantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. If you're listening on an Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platforms, please leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and like and comment down below any questions you may have for us. Rick, what was this trade?
So it kind of stunk, but I needed a running back. My RB1 was Breece Hall. He tore his ACL. So I was left with Dameon Pierce and Tyler Algier as my running backs on my roster. So I needed to go get a running back. So I traded Stephon Diggs, Lamar Jackson, Garrett Wilson for Dalvin Cook, Michael Pittman Jr., and Aaron Rodgers, which is really, really gross.
Dear heavens.
Did what I had to do. Got myself an RB1. I would like to think a high-end wide receiver 2.
Maybe a low-end wide receiver 1.
Yeah, maybe a low-end wide receiver 1.
Not with that quarterback.
Well, yeah, we'll see. And then Aaron Rodgers, who hasn't been great, but on a week-to-week basis, I could start him. Like this week, he's playing the Detroit Lions, so I'm feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah, there you go. Get right game for A-Rod.
Exactly. Love those.
Yeah, not bad. I feel like it kind of hurt your team for me this week, though. And
it did.
I hope that does end up hurting your team this week, but I'll probably lose anyway. So there's that.
I don't. Well, it depends. We'll see.
But either way, yeah, Rick and I matching up in the home league. We'll let you know how it goes. Usually I feel like this is a huge game, and really it is because we're both 4-4.
I know.
The 5 and the 6 seeds duking it out.
It's neither of our best, especially you're really shorthanded, but it's neither of our best teams.
Yeah, so it kind of blows. But either way, let's tell you some buys and sells for this week. Late season additions, huge. At this point in the year, if you are like 7-0 or 8-0, 7-1 or 6-2, this is a good time for you to start prepping for the postseason because the chances of you not making the postseason are slim to none. So at this point in the season, if I feel like I've made it to a point where I can start building my roster up, I'm trading for players that have good schedules down the stretch. I'm playing for guys that could be potential league winners down the stretch, guys like Amon-Ra last year, and trying to build my roster in preparation for that championship run. If you have defenses, sometimes if I have roster space, I'll pick up 1 or 2 defenses along those weeks that'll help me. Because it's season long, so you don't need the extra players if they suck.
Right.
So like I just start prepping for that portion of the season. So we're gonna give you some buys and sells and some guys that you should target, take advantage of, and grab for your season long leagues. And then we have some sells, some guys you should definitely deal before it's too late. Before the trade deadline goes and you're stuck. So anyway,
which might be coming up.
We'll go through the buys. Number 1, Devonte Adams of the Las Vegas Raiders, and this is one that I kind of saw. Like I like Adams, but I kind of saw this situation coming for Devonte Adams, where he's been good. Like he's been the wide receiver 9 on the season, but people were drafting him like the wide receiver 2 or 3 in fantasy football leagues, and I hesitated. I was like, he's going to the Raiders. Like, he just left Aaron Rodgers, who's his dude. You can't, unless he went to the Chiefs or the Bills, you weren't really getting any better than Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
And then he went to the Raiders. And I know there was like, everyone was talking about a connection between Derek Carr and Devonte Adams and all that stuff. And I just didn't buy in. I was like, Devonte Adams is not one of those guys I want to draft as a first round pick. If he fell to like the late second round or mid second round, like, then I would have been all on board with Devonte Adams, but the pick value was too much for me in the first round, especially like I think it was ADPing like 7 or 8. So I just couldn't get in on that. And now he's wide receiver 9 on the season, hasn't been producing at a super high level. And there's been some really good weeks and some really not so good weeks for Devonte Adams. But I think for right now, coming off this game against New Orleans where he had 5 targets, 1 catch, 3 yards.
Right.
For a whole fantasy point. He sucked. And the whole offense kind of blew. And I think this is an opportunity for you and others to run out to the team that has Devonte Adams and try to make a trade, because there is probably some panic going on. Panic in the streets about the Raiders. So I would go after Devonte Adams. It's probably still going to cost first or second round level value. It's going to take a lot to get Adams because I still think that value is there, name-wise. But I think Adams down the stretch could have a really good... He's got Pittsburgh and San Francisco and New England. Josh McDaniels always has a good time against New England. Pittsburgh's D blows, and San Francisco has been not great against wide receivers so far this year. So I feel like that stretch of playoff games could be really good for you, and Devonte Adams is definitely a buy at this point.
Yeah, I agree. And really, this past week was his really bad game, but outside of this past week, he's had a good season. 17, 27, 19, 14, 9, 30. Like that's pretty legit wide receiver 1 numbers. And then this week happened, and the Raiders lost so badly, and people look at the team and they look at Adams' week and they're like, I don't want anything to do with this team. I don't want anything to do with this offense. Sure, Devonte Adams is different, and you're still going to have to pay a big price. You're still going to have to it's name value too, so you're not getting him cheap. But now is the only time you'll probably even be able to get a guy like Adams.
Yeah.
And he still is a wide receiver 1. Now, and me and you in the offseason, we didn't think he was like a top 5 receiver. Mm-hmm. I think I had him ranked 5 or 6. You had him 6, I believe. Mm-hmm. And to me, I haven't really come off of that. I think he's still like 6 or 7, right?
Yeah.
Rest of season. So if you can get that level of a player, and he's not far off the other guys, he still is going to get a huge target share. Outside of this week, he has gotten a huge target share. I think this week was just a disaster for the whole team.
Yeah.
I don't think that continues moving forward. So they're going to get more than 0 points, right? Like that, they hit rock bottom this week.
Yeah, right.
Even if you think they're not a good team. So because of that, I think Adams is a great buy.
Yep, agreed. Number 2 is Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I have a tough time with this because I really do believe and buy in that Devonta Smith is a buy, and I'm trying to get him in several other leagues, but I can't in the home league get him because I have A.J. Brown. I can't justify having 2 wide receivers on the same team because I feel like if I trade for him, I'm probably going to have to start Smith.
Yeah.
And that's not a good situation for me. So I think Devonta Smith, really good wide receiver. He's clearly had a really, really good year. And Rick and I were talking pre-show, and Rick brought up the fact that Devonta Smith is kind of of the wide receivers from his class, he's kind of one of the most underrated guys because no one talks about him. You talk about Waddle and you talk about some other guys. Chase, and it's you're not talking about Devonta Smith, but he's actually been pretty good. Outside of that Detroit game in week 1, he's had 15, 34, 18, 15, and 7, and they have felt like they needed to force feed him the ball at times. And every time he doesn't get a high target share, they're like, we got to get this guy involved a little bit more. He always seems open. He's one of the best route runners, I think, in the league, and I think Smith is a really good player. He has some good matchups: Houston, Washington, Green Bay, Tennessee. Well, Green Bay is not a good matchup, but Tennessee, I think the Giants, Dallas, New Orleans. So down the stretch, he's going to have some easier matchups. Chicago. I feel good about Devonta Smith rest of season, and I think you should definitely go out and try to grab him, and I don't think he's going to cost as much as Adams. He's going to be a little bit cheaper than that. So I'm excited to see what Devonta Smith does rest of season. But there's also, the trepidation of, there's going to be weeks where he gets targeted a lot, and then there's going to be weeks where it's going to be a little bit of famine because it's the Eagles, and they like to run the ball. They're not a super high-flying passing offense. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
So I like Devonta Smith definitely rest of season. I think he's acquirable in trades, and I think he has a good rest of season schedule.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he's better than what I anticipated, I think, coming into the year. And I like the player, but the situation to me was kind of gross. The Eagles didn't really throw the ball a lot last year. I think outside of the Titans, they were dead last in the NFL in passing attempts, but they've thrown the ball more this year. And Jalen Hurts is taking the next step. So with those things combined, Smith has been pretty fantasy relevant. And he's a good buy because, he's inconsistent, but he's really solid outside of week 1, as you said, 15, 34. So you're going to get that 4-point week. But then 18, 15, 7. So even the 7-point week doesn't kill you starting at your flex, and then he's going to get you 2 straight weeks with 15 plus fantasy points. Yeah, that's a good buy, and I think you can get him around kind of the value that he went, maybe a little bit more than that, but that's still pretty cheap. If that's 7th round wide receiver, a low end flex. And I think to me that's pretty good value. So I'd be in on Devonta Smith. I like the player.
Yeah, agreed. Third and final one. This one will be a little bit faster, but I like Courtland Sutton as a buy, even though he's been bad. Bad.
Yeah, it's been bad.
I don't like it. I don't like it at all. But he has been so bad that he is easy buy. He is an easy buy. He's going to be cheaper than even Devonta Smith, and I think. What you saw earlier in the season was what you get. He had a bad game, and then he had the Brett Ripon game, and then he had the freaking London game. So nothing's been consistent for the Denver Broncos at all lately. And, they scored 21 points this week, most of the season for them, which is good. Good for them. Hopefully they're moving in the right direction. But I think Courtland Sutton is better than those 3 or 4 targets. We saw him earlier in the season, even when Denver was bad offensively, still have good games. So he's not incapable of having good games, and I think he's a decent flex for teams. I still think he's like at worst a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. And if Denver does start to figure it out offensively and start to make plays in the second half of the season and score more points, Courtland Sutton obviously benefits from that. It's clear to me that they like Courtland Sutton a little bit more than Jerry Jeudy at this point, but Judy's been more productive. I'll say that over the last couple weeks. So I like Courtland Sutton. I think it's a cheap buy. It's worth the investment, and if he does start to turn things around, obviously it'll be a good investment for you long term for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think Sutton's very solid still. The last couple weeks didn't scare me. The London game kind of scared me a little bit because now it's 3 straight weeks of this. But you're right, Reppin. Brett Reppin. Is that how you pronounce this? Reppin?
Reapin. I don't know.
Either way.
However you want.
That game, yeah, Brett, you can't expect much when Brett's your quarterback, right?
Yeah.
And then he had the 1 bad game and then the 2 bad games. If he has a 3rd bad game, then I'm very scared. But I think that he's going to get back to being involved because outside of those 3 weeks, he was getting 7 to 11 targets a game. Mm-hmm. He seemed like he was at least right there with Jeudy, if not higher in terms of target share, as being the guy for Denver. So I think he's going to go back to that. And you could probably get him cheap, really cheap right now. That's the biggest thing is like, obviously in our league you can't because he's on your team, but in other leagues, I don't think the asking price will be that much. Like maybe like, I think you could probably, his value is around the same as Devonta Smith's, right?
Yep. Probably a little bit lower.
Which is, again, if it's reasonable for Smith, I think it should be really reasonable for Sutton too. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's that high. I think it's like a wide receiver 3, which to me is really good value. And if you can pull the trigger on that, you should go ahead and do it.
Yep.
Side note, the Broncos also were potentially going to trade Jerry Jeudy, and they didn't do that. So that kind of, I don't know if that hurts the Sutton shares, because if they traded him, I don't know if that would actually help Sutton. Apparently the Packers weren't close in offering a second and an additional late round pick to get Jeudy, but they would have got Jeudy if they just offered a second and like a 4th.
Oh my god!
Which what a bunch of bricks the Green Bay Packers are!
I know.
Holy cow!
My pants would have been off.
I know. And for a 2nd round pick, like you're not going to trade it for a 2nd round pick for Jerry Jeudy. Like, are you serious? When you need a receiver that bad?
I know.
Oh,
that's so stupid. Anyway,
it really is.
Let's jump into the sells and complete the shows for the week. What say you?
All right, let's do it.
All right. Tua Tagovailoa, number 1 on the sell list. Listen, I love Tua. I'm back on the train. Love you, Tua. Sorry.
You were very anti-Tua.
Sorry for leaving. I do still hate the Dolphins.
Okay.
I need the Dolphins to be losing football games, but Tua is a good quarterback. He's a good quarterback in the NFL. He does a lot of things well. There's some things that, because his arm is just a freaking disaster, and he has no like his arm strength is worse than Mac Jones. Don't know why, but it's pretty bad. And like he just throws ducks. But the one thing that he does do well is throw it short and throw RPOs. And when you have these 2 wide receivers, it don't matter.
He's very accurate.
He's very accurate. But the big thing for him is that we saw earlier in the season a huge game against Baltimore, 46 points. Everyone claimed it as his breakout game with 6 touchdowns in the comeback. And then he goes out the next week, plays 93% of the snaps, and only gets 12 fantasy points. 186 yards and a touchdown following up his huge performance against Baltimore. Obviously, he didn't really play against Cincinnati, the Jets, or Minnesota. And then he goes out against Pittsburgh and throws 261-1, which I think is on pace for what Tua will do probably rest of season. But that's only 16 fantasy points. He doesn't really rush the ball all that much. And last week against Detroit, he's coming off this big performance of 382-3. I've talked about this before with Tua. Tua is what Jimmy Garoppolo is to San Francisco. Like, that is what Tua is. I know people don't want to hear it, but that is essentially what it is. If you look at the past stats for Jimmy Garoppolo, there have been 40-point weeks for him. There have been 30-point weeks for him.
I don't know about 40, but there's definitely been.
I swear, I looked back in the past. There has been 40-point games for him.
When did he get 40?
I'll look it up and bring it up next time. Off show. But I think he is at least like equivalent or slightly better than Jimmy Garoppolo. But with that being said, there's gonna be weeks where Tua blows up, right? And there's gonna be weeks where Tua is not great. And I think that there's not enough games here to see that from a fantasy perspective. So here's an opportunity where you can probably take Tua and sell him to a QB needy team and be like, okay, take this guy off his big performance this week. Rick put him on this list, so I'm curious to see what Rick says. I'll look up the Jimmy Garoppolo numbers for you. What are your thoughts on Tua?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because he's kind of said it jokingly, but there's someone in our league, the person who has him, was like, oh, thanks for dropping him. He's the guy now on my team. Like, he's the starting going forward. And if you view Tua as that, or someone in your league views Tua as that,
yeah,
maybe you have a Dolphins fan. Maybe you have a guy in your league who just, picked up Tua, and he got him like 30 plus fantasy points.
It was a 35-point game. Forgive me.
Okay, that's still really good though.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Tua goes out and gets you 33 points, whatever he got this week, 30 fantasy points. And they're like, okay, Tua's a legit guy. Go trade him to that team right now.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. Tua, especially fantasy wise, like, he doesn't run, right? So he's gonna have to have these big passing weeks, and it will happen. He's gonna have games like 46 points is not happening again, but a big game, and then he gets 30, another big game. But he's gonna have weeks in here. The week before that against Pittsburgh, he had it's 16 in a 5-point touchdown league, so 15 fantasy points. Like, that's gonna happen a lot. And to me, Tua's not a top 10 fantasy quarterback because of the inconsistencies. So you can trade him away though for that type of value, I think. Maybe not in every league, but there are most certainly leagues where you can trade him away as a top 10 quarterback value. And you got to do that because this week, too, he played Detroit. Detroit has the worst defense in the NFL. Of course, Tua is going to have a good week. And he does have some easy matchups still, but it will get harder for him as the season goes on, especially the end of season, that playoff schedule and before that. So, like, from week 13 on, San Francisco, Chargers, Bills, Packers, Patriots.
Yep.
There's a couple tough matchups in there. So, I would get ahead of it, trade him now, and you can get pretty good value for him.
Agreed. Number 2 on the sells list, Juju Smith-Schuster. He's just been a harborer of 8 targets a game, and all I see on this is 8 targets. Like as soon as Mahomes hits 8 targets with Juju, he turns off the valve.
Right.
No more targets for you. You already had 8. You had enough to eat. The last 2 weeks he's had 22 and 25 fantasy points.
I like it.
Very good. I actually don't mind Juju. I think his rest of season schedule blows. I think it's horrible. Playoffs and championship. He's got a game against Houston, which is okay. He's got a Seattle game, and he's got Denver. I don't like any of those. So I'm feeling like Juju's not going to be great down the stretch here. He's got a couple of easier matchups, so your sell window could be, after the Jacksonville game, you might be able to wait. I think he'll have a good game then. But like I said, I'm not like if you end up getting past your deadline and he's on your flex position, second flex, first flex, whatever it is, if that's where he is, then I think you're fine. But I think the big problem with Juju rest of season obviously is that schedule. But like he's not going to get 25 or 22 points on a week-to-week basis.
No.
And I think if you can take these 2 games, especially with the
These might be 2 of his best games of the year.
I know, this might be 2 of his best games of the year. With the addition of Kadarius Toney, I don't know they're going to take target share away from Juju because I think Toney plays a different kind of role for the team. But sure. I feel like these 22 and 25 point games are sell-worthy opportunities. Like, early in the season he didn't have great performances, but now maybe they're, the Chiefs have found something with Juju and they're going to utilize him, more now, and he's going to be the new Tyreek Hill for the Chiefs. If that, if that is true and it happens, then you have an elite wide receiver, and if you hold him after the deadline, then you're good. But the likelihood of that happening is slim to none. I think Juju is a trade-worthy asset because he had these 2 big games. You can sell him as that, and people are going to think that he has this big breakout upside for the Chiefs, and I don't think he does.
Yeah, so here's the thing with Juju is I do still like the player.
Right.
And I still like Juju. You don't got to trade him. But he is a good sell option because even with the last 2 weeks, the way he's performed, they're still using him pretty much the same way. He's still the slot guy. He's still short yardage. He's just turned a couple plays into big plays, and he's gotten a touchdown. So, but the way they've used him through 8 weeks hasn't changed. And if you look at the weeks in the beginning of the season, that's still very much in his cards in a week-to-week basis. He still very much could get you 4 points. He could still get you 6 points, 9 points. Even though his target share is not bad, it's not like they're chucking it to him 40 yards down the field. They haven't really been doing that. He has made a couple big plays this past 2 weeks, but the air yard still isn't really there. So he's still the slot guy. He's still the short yardage guy, the third down guy, which isn't bad. And, when he gets touchdowns on a week-to-week basis, it's still good. But people are going to see these monster performances these last 2 weeks and think that he might have turned a corner. And I don't think he has. I think these are just going to be outliers, to be honest. I do think he could stay in maybe low double digits, though, on a week-to-week basis, 11 to 13 and be a good flex for you. I absolutely believe that's true. But I don't think these big performances are something that are going to continue. You also mentioned Kadarius Toney. Might be nothing, might absolutely be nothing, but he might be something too. And if he's something, and they use him a lot and he's really good, I do think that hurts Juju, even though they play different roles. I think Toney actually does play a lot in the slot, if I remember correctly, on the Giants. And he's also used in end arounds. He's going to be used in all sorts of different ways if he ends up getting used a lot. So that is another possibility that could affect Juju. So there's a couple different things. Again, you don't have to trade him, though, if you don't want to. I do think he'll still be a good flex, but his sell high window, I think, might be at a peak.
Yep, I agree. Quickly, give you 30 seconds on Devonta Foreman. Go.
Okay, Foreman has been doing very good. I will admit, better than I thought. But I don't think it's continuing. He had 7 yards a carry against Tampa. And then this week against Atlanta, had 4 yards a carry, but he had 26 carries. He's not going to get 26 carries again. That is just not happening. Chuba Hubbard's coming back this week. And I'm not saying Chuba Hubbard is going to be a workhorse by any means. I think they're going to probably split, which then you're looking at probably around 12 carries for Deontay Foreman with no passing work. I don't expect that to be good. Unless the Panthers keep scoring 30 points a week, then what do I know?
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely not going to continue for Devonta Foreman, but I feel like there's opportunity for him, to continue to have success. So I think he's going to be a high-end RB3 probably rest of season. Low-end RB2 maybe if he continues with the production. When Hubbard gets back, I don't clearly if you're an NFL team and you're managing a roster, Hubbard's young, Foreman's old, you want to go with the younger guy. So I feel like they'll definitely try to get Hubbard involved a little bit more. But I still think Foreman is going to have a role and he's going to have an impact for the Carolina Panthers. And so that's good. I would definitely sell him. I have him on a team. I'd love to sell him. I don't know who is going to take him. And that's the problem. Everyone's kind of looking at Foreman as the same kind of player and being okay, he doesn't really have anything left. So
in our league.
Yeah, at least in our league. But somebody might be able to be oh my God, waiver wire ad of the year.
Oh, go look at Twitter, bro.
Oh, dear God. But
there's
anyway.
There's Foreman people.
That's Devonta Foreman. You have any more thoughts on him?
No, I think that's it.
All right, there you go. Buys and sells. Go get the buys. Sell the sells. Get rid of those old players. Bring in some new ones. It'll be good for your team. Influx of talent right before the trade deadline. Enjoy your weekend, guys. Hopefully you get a win. Comment down below any questions you have for us. See you later.
See you.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.